So we need to figure out how to add and or subtract two fractions from each other, or we need to be able to multiply fractions. A fraction times a fraction. We need to be able to look at proportions and understand why proportion works, and where do I use that cross product, where you multiply diagonally. All right. So that's the basics of this video. So let's first add or subtract. Now this works where you're adding or subtracting. It doesn't matter what the sign is. You still have to do a few things before you can do either one. The idea here is when you take two fractions and you're going to add them or subtract them, they have to have the same denominator. You can't just add 3 and 5 and 2 and 6 and say and then call it a day. That's not how it works. So what you need to do is you need to make sure these both have the same denominator. So there's a couple of things to look at. If you look at this, they don't have the same denominator. You want both of them to be the same. So now there's a trick. There's a trick to this. You can manipulate this fraction to make it basically say whatever you want to say. I can make this bottom say whatever I want it to say, but if I using multiplication. So, for instance, I could turn a 2 into a 6 very easily using multiplication. 2 times 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the bottom here by 3. But if I do it to the bottom, I need to do it to the top. All right, I'm going to multiply the top by 3 and the bottom to 3. Just this fraction. And why is that? Why can I do that? Well, essentially what you're doing is you're multiplying it by 3 over 3, the fraction of 3 over 3. What is 3 divided by 3? It's 1. You can multiply anything by 1 and get the same thing back. All right, so it's a tricky looking one. So if I do that, I say 3 times 2 is 6. So I get 6 on the bottom, and 3 times 3 is 9. And I want to add that to that same fraction of 5/6. Don't forget what you've done here. You've just rearranged this fraction. This is 9/6 is the same as 3/2. If you simplify this down, you get 3/2. So the idea here is you want to multiply one or both of these bottoms to get the same value. In this case, I recognize that I can multiply the bottom by 3 to get 6. Once I have the same denominators, my answer when I add or subtract will have the same denominator. Oh, by the way, the bottom is called the denominator. The top is called the numerator. Fancy terminology. Now, just take 9 plus 5, 14. 14. This right here is equal to 14/6. Now, I notice that both these are even, so I know that 2 will go into both. I'm going to simplify this. I'm assuming you can simplify a fraction. It's just been a while since you've dealt with adding and subtracting fractions. That's what I'm assuming. All right. So let's look at another scenario where in this case there's 7/8 plus 2/9. Now, I can't necessarily multiply 8 by something to get 9, and I can't really multiply 9 by something to get 8. So the trick here is multiply it by each other. I'm going to multiply this fraction by 9 over 9. Multiply this fraction here by 8 over 8. So when I do that, 9 times 7, what is that, 63? And 9 times 8 is 72. Plus 2 times 8 is 16. 9 times 8 is 72. Looky there, I got the same denominator. So now I can say, let's see, 63 plus 16 is 79 over 72. And I can simplify that down if I want. So when all else fails, I just suggest you multiply this by the other denominator and this guy by the other denominator. Instead of trying to find the lowest common multiple or anything like that, it works out the same. Then you can simplify it over here if you want. All right. Let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. Here's one more. Here's a common one. A fraction plus a whole number. Well, tell you what, guys and gals, a whole number is essentially a fraction. It's just over 1. How can I make 7 on the bottom over here? I'd multiply this by 7. If you do it to the bottom, you got to do it to the top. So 3/7 plus 2 times 7 is 14. 1 times 7, 7. Same denominator now. I'm adding, right? So 3 plus 14. Bam! Easy peasy. Now, even easier is when you multiply fractions. So I'm going to take the same fractions and multiply them. When you're multiplying fractions, I have a little dot in between to say that I'm multiplying. you'd multiply straight across the top and straight across the bottom. Easy peasy. Straight across the top, straight across the bottom. Straight across the top. Oh wait, there's no top and bottom. Remember, whole numbers are fractions. They're just over 1. Straight across the top, straight across the bottom. Multiplying fractions is super duper easy, and it's super fun. Do you remember proportions? A proportion is where you have two fractions that are equal to each other. So for instance, 1/2 is equal to 2/4, correct? That's correct. Now, to know if something is a proportion, if you want to double check to see if this is correct, their cross products must be equal. Is that equal? 1 times 4 equal to this cross product. 2 times 2. Yeah, 4 is equal to 4. What about 1/3 and 3/9? Is this a proportion? Sure. 1 times 9 is equal to 3 times 3. So now you're thinking, well, what's the point of this? Well, a lot of times you'll have a ratio set to something, another ratio that you don't know all information about. So, but you do know that's a proportion because there's an equal sign. So how would you solve for this number on top? Well, you can set your cross products equal. 5 times 10 equals 6 times x. So 50 equals 6x divided by 6. And you get x equals 50 over 6, 25 over 30. All right. Well, it even gets a little bit easier. What if your proportion is 5/6 over x over 6? If you have the same denominator, well, wouldn't that mean your numerators have to be the same as well? It does. That's what that means. So if you have an eagle eye, you can see this. If you have the same denominator, then your numerators must be the same. So what you can do then is actually manipulate your denominators instead of doing this whole cross product thing, which isn't a big deal, all right? But in later in algebra, where you're starting to, when these fractions get a lot more difficult, it's easier to actually set the denominators equal than it is to manipulate everything else or do cross products. So for instance, I can get these two denominators to be the same if I remember how I did a second ago to get the same denominator. Multiply by the other denominator. So that would be 35 over 42 equals 6x over 42. And once you have the same denominator, you set these guys equal. So 5 by 6. 35/6 is what x is. And it's just a different way of doing a proportion, but most times people just say do the cross product. All right, but like I said, when you talk about solving rational equations, it does come up to where this is actually the easier way of doing it than doing the cross product